Welcome to the thinking stack. Let's cut straight to it. India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
Nuclear neighbors, locked in what honestly feels like this perpetual state of barely contained conflict.
It really does. Think of it maybe like a high-stakes geopolitical game of chicken.
Except both drivers have their hands hovering over buttons that could, well, end the game for everyone. Permanently.
A truly dangerous impasse.
Yeah.
And one with such a long, tangled history. You know, Stephen Cohen put it so well. He said, South Asia is the only place where history sometimes travels in circles with a trigger attached.
That's chillingly accurate.
And our aim today, it isn't just to trace that circle. We want to dissect it, really break it down using our integrated thinking stack.
Yeah.
7 layers, designed for clarity. Yeah. And a hard look at potential actions.
Right. This isn't about, armchair analysis. It's about understanding the core dynamics. We start with the perception stack.
Okay.
First, cognitive cleanse. That means stripping away the propaganda, the noise, to see the unvarnished facts.
Essential first step.
Then, moral intelligence. Grappling with the ethical responsibilities, the debts on both sides, because it's never simple.
Never. And from there, we move to the prediction stack. So systemic foresight helps us map out potential escalations, the ripples, the consequences.
Okay.
Then embodied insight delves into the, let's say, the underlying psychology, the institutional drivers. Why did they do these things?
And human-centered design forces us to look at the real-world impact, on actual people.
Absolutely crucial. Finally, the action stack.
Right.
Risk and resilience lets us stress test the fault lines, the vulnerabilities, where could things break.
An execution engine, that's about designing concrete, actionable steps. What can actually be done for de-escalation?
Exactly. This framework, that's our lens for understanding the current, very dangerous situation.
And recent events really just underscore that danger, don't they?
They absolutely do. Look at April 22nd, 2025, 26 tourists massacred in Pahalgam, Kashmir.
Yeah.
Just horrific.
India immediately blamed the Islamic Resistance Front, describing it as essentially a Lashkar Taiba LET clone.
That was the immediate narrative, yes.
And then, just days later, India launches Operation Sindoor.
Swift retaliation. 24 precision-guided missiles hitting 9 targets inside Pakistan-controlled territory.
Pakistan's reaction, furious, called it an act of war, claimed 26 civilian deaths.
Which India disputes, of course.
Naturally. And cue the predictable surge in the information war on all sides. Propaganda machines kicked into high gear.
And just as predictably, defense spending is shooting up everywhere.
Tell me about it. Pakistan's reported increase is, what, a staggering 18%?
18%, during a time of severe economic pressure, mind you.
And India's defense budget now sits at a colossal 6.8 lakh crore. That's huge.
It is. And you really have to ask, don't you, who truly benefits from this constant escalation, this military buildup, especially when so many other needs, basic human needs, go unmet?
It sets the stage for a pretty bleak analysis, I think, but a necessary one.
Absolutely necessary.
So let's get into the perception stack, starting with that cognitive cleanse. What are the undeniable documented facts here, even if they shatter some carefully constructed narratives?
Okay, fact number 1. Look, despite current public denials from Pakistan, it's historically well established, the existence and implementation of Operation Tupah.
Right, going back decades.
Decades. This wasn't some rogue thing. It was formalized back in 1979, a 3-phase program run by the ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence, designed for low-cost, high-impact insurgency in Kashmir.
And initially funded by?
Funded by U.S. and Saudi money during the Soviet-Afghan War. That's where the initial resources came from. The playbook was simple. Arm, train, infiltrate.
Okay. Arm, train, infiltrate. That leads us to fact number 2, which is just brutal. The blowback.
Oh, the blowback on Pakistan itself has been devastating. Their own government figures, repeatedly stated, put the death toll from terrorism since 2001 somewhere between 50,000 and 83,000 people.
50 to 83,000.
Yes. And they also claim around $120 billion in economic losses from this so-called war on terror.
These aren't just abstract numbers. That's a horrific cost.
Borne primarily by Pakistani citizens. While the focus is often external, the internal cost of, let's say, cultivating these groups has been absolutely immense.
Which brings us to fact 3, and this is a disturbing paradox.
It is. Despite these losses, despite the current economic pressures, Pakistan's under significant IMF austerity measures the Pakistani military's vast business empire. It just keeps expanding.
You're talking about entities like Fauci Foundation, Army Welfare Trust, AWT, Bahria Town?
Exactly, that whole complex. Aisha Siddiqa's book, Military Inc., is still absolutely crucial for understanding this, how military power translates into economic power.
A stark contrast, isn't it? National suffering on one hand, institutional enrichment on the other. Okay, moving to fact number 4, India's side of the equation. Their security apparatus has shown some significant vulnerabilities.
Undeniably. Major attacks have happened because of, frankly, demonstrable lapses. The 2016 raid on the Pathankote Air Force Base, for instance. Clear perimeter failures, intelligence failures, it was all laid out.
And then Pulwama in 2019, fact number 5, that was reportedly preceded by how many warnings?
11. 11 separate warnings that were apparently ignored. An internal CRPF inquiry documented this. How does that happen? How do you miss 11 warnings before such a catastrophic attack?
It raises serious questions about systemic issues.
Absolutely. And tragically, fact number 6 shows this pattern continued. The recent Pahalgam massacre, April 2025, reports suggested exploited known security gaps along tourist routes. These weren't unknown vulnerabilities.
So a pattern of systemic vulnerabilities on the Indian side. Then there's fact 7, the deeply uncomfortable issue of Abbottabad.
Yes. Bad. Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda at the time, found living just 1.3 kilometers from the Pakistan Military Academy, their equivalent of West Point or Sandhurst.
1.3 kilometers. It's staggering.
The official Abbottabad Commission report, commissioned by Pakistan itself, called this the country's worst humiliation since the loss of East Pakistan in 1971.
So it raises fundamental questions, doesn't it? Was it complicity? Or was it just staggering incompetence on a scale that's hard to comprehend?
Uncomfortable questions that, frankly, remain largely unanswered, which leads to fact 8. Cross-border strikes are now basically a recurring feature.
India's 2016 surgical raids, the 2019 Balakot airstrike, those set a precedent.
They did. And then in 2025 came Operation Sindoor. India claimed it targeted militant sites, 24 missiles, 9 locations. India claimed 31 militants killed.
But then, fact number 9, Pakistan claimed 26 civilian deaths from that same operation.
Exactly. And the problem, independent verification of these claims on either side is virtually impossible in the current environment. It just becomes part of the information war.
Leaving this haze of contested narratives, claim and counterclaim.
Precisely. Fact number 10. The core issue of Kashmir and the ignored UN framework.
UN Resolution 47, right, from way back in 1948.
That's the one. It clearly stipulated Pakistan was to withdraw its irregular forces first, before any plebiscite could even be considered.
And that withdrawal
never happened. Never fulfilled that primary condition. So the entire basis for a resolution under that specific framework was effectively undermined from the start.
Okay. Finally, fact 11. The changing military footprint on the ground.
Yes, this is interesting. India has reduced its troop numbers in Jammu and Kashmir, down from around 300,000 post-2019 to roughly 200,000 now.
Which sounds like de-escalation, potentially.
On the surface, yes. But reports indicate an unintended consequence. This reduced troop density, particularly in areas like Rajouri and Poonch, has apparently created new infiltration corridors, easier routes for militants to slip across.
So a move intended perhaps to ease tensions has inadvertently created new security challenges.
It appears so. A classic example of complex system effects.
Okay, let's try to summarize this cognitive cleanse. It's brutal.
It is. Pakistan initiated and sustained a proxy war program, Operation Tupac being the prime example. This inflicted immense damage on its own population, even as its military business complex seems to thrive.
Right. Meanwhile, India has demonstrated repeated, serious security failures that enabled major attacks. Pathankote, Pulwama, Pahalgam.
Pakistan harbored a globally recognized terrorist leader, bin Laden, right next door to its premier military academy. Whether through complicity or incompetence, it happened.
Both nations engage in cross-border military actions with completely unverifiable claims about who they hit and who got killed.
A foundational UN resolution on Kashmir was never fully implemented because the first condition wasn't met.
And even seemingly positive steps, like adjusting troop deployments, can have unintended negative consequences, creating new vulnerabilities.
It's a stark picture. Pakistan's strategic assets backfired spectacularly, costing them dearly. India's security vulnerabilities are repeatedly exploited with deadly results. Neither side comes out looking clean.
Not even close.
Yeah.
A deeply unsettling foundation, as you said. But necessary before we move to layer 2, moral intelligence. Now we have to grapple with the ethical debts.
Exactly. Who carries the moral burden in this mess?
Well, Pakistan consistently frames itself as the victim, right?
Yeah.
They point to the tens of thousands killed, the massive economic losses since 2001. How can you blame us? That's the narrative.
And India's counter-narrative is just as strong. We're the ones constantly under attack. Mumbai, Pathankot, Pulwama, Pahalgam. Look at the list. Our citizens live under this constant threat originating from your soil.
It's this deeply entrenched cycle of reciprocal blame. Each side feels entirely justified in its victimhood.
But here's where the moral contortion comes in, particularly for Pakistan. They actively cultivated and supported jihadi groups. They formalized proxy war with things like Operation Tupac. They used these groups as foreign policy tools against India, against Afghanistan. And then they effectively claim victimhood when those very same groups inevitably turn inward and unleash terror within Pakistan itself. Those tens of thousands of Pakistani deaths, they are in large part a direct consequence of that state policy. It's not just external victimization. It's a profound self-inflicted wound.
So a massive ethical debt owed to their own people.
Absolutely, for the devastating repercussions of state policy. And as we discussed, the fact that the military's business interests, Military Inc., continue to flourish amidst all this national suffering, well, it only intensifies that moral dissonance.
The hypocrisy is glaring. But let's turn that moral lens onto India now. When India conducts cross-border strikes 2016-2019, the recent Operation Sindoor, the official line, is always necessary counterterrorism, a measured response.
That's the justification. But Pakistan claims significant civilian casualties, 26 dead in Operation Sindoor alone, they say. India typically dismisses these claims.
So who do you believe?
And that's the ethical crux, isn't it?
Yes.
Without independent verification on the ground, which is basically non-existent, we're stuck. We have conflicting accounts from two nations locked in this intense information war.
If civilians did die, even unintentionally,
then it raises serious questions about the proportionality of India's response. It challenges their claims of upholding ethical conduct, even in counterterrorism. There's a potential moral debt there, too.
Right, and the silence around Abattoir just hangs there, undermining Pakistan's moral standing. Complicity or incompetence, neither looks good ethically.
Neither constitutes a strong moral defense, no. And on India's side, those repeated, undeniable security failures. Pathankot, Pulwama, with its 11 ignored warnings, Pahalgam, again, maybe it's not sponsoring terror, but it represents a significant ethical failure of responsibility, a failure to protect their own citizens.
A failure that points to systemic dysfunction, with a heavy human cost. A dysfunction that almost seems to invite attacks sometimes.
It raises that question. And we can't ignore the power dynamics. Pakistan's defense budget jumping 18% right after Operation Sindoor. It strongly suggests the conflict itself fuels the military's economic and political clout.
The military-industrial complex benefiting directly from tension.
On both sides. And in India, let's be honest, with elections always on the horizon, Bihar and Delhi mentioned, for late 2025, we've seen it before, 1999, 2019, assertive military action often translates into a domestic political boost.
Using fear for political gain. A cynical but effective strategy.
It seems to be. So, the cognitive cleanse gave us the messy facts, this moral intelligence layer. It reveals neither side has clean hands. Pakistan weaponized extremists with devastating blowback. India's security is porous, and its retaliation carries serious ethical questions about civilian harm.
And both seem willing to exploit the conflict for internal political and economic advantage. It's a morally compromised landscape all around.
A stark, necessary assessment, which sets us up for the prediction stack. Where does this trajectory likely lead?
Okay, we've navigated the moral maze, and yeah, the picture is grim. Pakistan dealing with the consequences of its own strategies, India struggling with security and the ethics of hitting back, both maybe using the conflict. Now, layer 3, systemic foresight. Trying to anticipate the future. What are the likely escalations, the second-order effects?
Exactly. What are the unintended, maybe catastrophic consequences just waiting to happen? First, let's talk about the proxy loop.
Okay.
India strikes alleged training sites, like in Operation Sindoor. What's Pakistan's likely response? It's probably not going to be, okay, we'll stop now.
Unlikely, yeah.
Experts suggest it just forces them to get smarter, better at using deniable assets, which could mean more unpredictable terror attacks inside India and, ironically, more internal instability for Pakistan, too, as these groups become harder to control. It's a vicious cycle.
So Indian strikes risk making the problem worse, in a way, creating smaller, more dangerous cells.
That's the risk. It fragments the landscape.
Yeah.
And this, of course, brings us to the big one, the ever-present threat, the nuclear shadow.
Right. Both nuclear-armed,
both nuclear-armed. India officially has a no first-use policy, meaning they say they'll only use nuclear weapons if attacked with them first.
But Pakistan?
Pakistan's doctrine is different. It's called full-spectrum deterrence. They explicitly reserve the right to use nuclear weapons early, potentially even on the battlefield, if they feel their conventional forces are being overwhelmed or if they perceive an existential threat. This is a huge difference.
And a combined arsenal of around, what, 340 warheads?
Roughly that, yes. So any conventional clash, any border incident, even a misunderstanding, dramatically shrinks the decision time.
A skirmish on the LOC, a dodgy radar blip, maybe a viral deepfake video.
Suddenly, leaders on both sides are under immense pressure to make world-altering decisions in minutes, not hours or days. The digital age just compresses that timeline for potential nuclear escalation to an absolutely alarming degree.
It's terrifying, truly.
Beyond the immediate nuclear threat, there's the crippling budgetary drag. We mentioned Pakistan's defense budget jumping 18% after Operation Sindoor. That's over PKR 2.5 trillion.
Which directly bolsters the military's economic power, as we discussed.
Right. But in a country facing severe IMF austerity, that money is being diverted from healthcare, education, infrastructure, things that citizens desperately need. It's guns versus butter, writ large.
And India's spending, also astronomical, over 6.8 lakh crore.
Colossal. Even with a larger economy, that's a massive diversion of resources. Think about climate resilience, poverty reduction. These are two nations highly vulnerable to climate change, prioritizing military spending over existential environmental threats. It feels unsustainable, economically and environmentally.
And the battle isn't just physical anymore, is it? It's digital.
Increasingly so. Both militaries now have Director General level information warfare units. They are actively shaping narratives, pumping out propaganda.
We talked about that, Twitterist trench war cosplay.
It's a good description. But what happens when that's fueled by really sophisticated deepfakes? We saw millions of AI-generated videos in India's 2024 state elections. Imagine that tech deliberately weaponized for cross-border psyops.
Oh, God. Pakistan's ISPR faking videos of Indian rockets hitting schools. India's high-T self-fabricating kill count.
Exactly. When you can't tell what's real anymore. When disinformation is deployed at scale like that, it destroys any chance of a shared reality. How can leaders or even citizens make rational decisions if they can't trust the information they're getting? This degradation of truth markets, it's incredibly dangerous.
Because it dramatically increases the chance of accidental escalation based on lies or fakes.
Precisely. So systemic foresight paints this stark picture. A conflict that feeds itself through proxies, overshadowed by nuclear risk, with doctrines favoring early use, draining vital resources, and increasingly fought in a digital space where truth is the first casualty. These aren't separate issues. They're all interconnected parts of a deeply unstable system.
So the ripples aren't fading, they're amplifying. Potential tsunamis fueled by misspent money and deliberate deception, while people's basic needs get ignored.
A sobering prediction, but necessary. And it sets the stage for understanding the human and institutional factors that keep this whole dangerous system locked in place.
Right, so we've mapped the potential future disasters, the proxy wars, nukes, budgets, digital lies. Systemic foresight shows us the what. But layer 4, embodied insight. This asks why. Why do seemingly rational states keep choosing such obviously dangerous paths?
Exactly. This is about the psychology, the deep-seated institutional habits, the ingrained fears, the biases that cloud judgment. It's the human element.
The self-destructive human element, maybe. It's not just policy papers, it's the minds and institutions making those policies, conditioned by decades of this very conflict. Let's start with Pakistan. The sources really highlight the army's self-image, don't they? Guardians of the ideological frontier.
Yes, that phrase is critical ideological frontier. It's not just about land borders. It's about defending an ideology, a way of life, against what they perceive as an existential Hindu threat.
Which creates a psychological need for an enemy.
It seems so. A constant external adversary helps justify their power, their status, their resource allocation. It becomes central to their identity. In that context, lasting peace can actually feel like a threat to their very purpose.
And it's not just ideology, it gets very practical, very quickly. The rotation you mentioned, senior officers moving between battlefield commands and seats on the boards of military businesses.
That's the military Inc. phenomenon again.
Yeah.
It directly links sustained tension, if not outright conflict, to tangible economic benefits for powerful individuals and the institution itself. Conflict becomes intertwined with financial interests. Peace might actually be bad for business, in a way.
A deeply embedded, self-reinforcing loop. Okay, what about India, especially post-2019? There's this strong narrative equating muscular responses, strikes, raids with national pride.
Absolutely. The government has very effectively tied assertive military action to a popular sense of nationalism. A strong response is framed as a sign of strength and resolve.
And the media fans the flames, doesn't it? Those endless war room debates on TV, the hyper-nationalism.
It absolutely normalizes aggression. It primes the public to expect, even demand, retaliation, narrowing the political space for diplomacy or de-escalation. Conciliation can be portrayed as weakness.
And this conditioning,
Yeah.
it's deep. You mentioned 3 generations growing up with this.
3 generations on both sides living under this shadow. For many, constant hostility isn't the exception. It's just the norm. It's the background noise of life.
And then you layer social media on top.
Exactly. The outrage cycles, often fueled by those state-backed information warfare units we talked about, it injects constant fear and anger into the public discourse, making nuanced thinking almost impossible. It limits political imagination.
It literally conditions people to react with fear and aggression. And think about the soldiers on the LOC.
Imagine 12 months in high alert zones, maybe a 15-second warning before artillery fire hits. Hypervigilance becomes your default state. Peace doesn't feel like safety. It feels unfamiliar, maybe even dangerous, because your whole being is wired for threat.
So the conflict gets entrenched, biologically, socially.
Yes. The institutions, the political narratives, the media, the public anger, the individual psychology, it all reinforces this ecosystem of fear, identity, and vested interests, built on historical trauma, sustained by current incentives.
So systemic foresight shows us the potential train wreck, and embodied insight reveals why we seem to be walking towards it with our eyes open, because we're conditioned to. The trap isn't just external, it's internal, it's systemic.
A sobering but crucial realization. And it leads us directly to considering the human cost of this deeply ingrained conflict. Layer 5. Human-centered design.
Okay, we've looked at the risks, the psychology, the institutions. Now, human-centered design, this forces us to shift focus, right, to the lived realities of the individuals caught in this mess. What's the actual human cost?
Exactly. Moving beyond abstract strategy to the tangible impact on ordinary people. And as we've touched on, that modern information war plays a devastating role here.
It's a battle for perception fought online.
Waged digitally, yes. Both militaries have these sophisticated, director general level information warfare units actively working to shape how people see things.
Right. Like Pakistan's ISPR. They're good at this stuff. Orchestrating hashtag storms, remember hashtag Kashmir bleeds. And using AI now. Fabricated videos.
Increasingly. Targeting specific audiences too, like journalists in the global south, trying to frame Pakistan as the victim on the world stage.
Meanwhile, India's IT cell and the INB Ministry's fact-check unit are doing their own thing, pushing hashtag Operations Indoor narratives, countering Pakistan's claims, often focused internally on domestic opinion.
It's a constant digital tug-of-war. And the danger, as we discussed with deepfakes, is immense. Millions of synthetic clips in India's 2024 elections. Imagine that deliberately used for cross-border provocation.
When you can't tell real from fake anymore, a fake video could literally trigger a real military response, based on nothing.
And we know these campaigns are real. Third-party groups have exposed them. The EU Disinfo Lab found the Indian Chronicles Network hundreds of fake NGOs pushing pro-India lines. CENJOWS studied Pakistan's social media ops. But just knowing about it doesn't stop the harm.
No, because while these digital battles rage, civilians on the ground, especially in Kashmir, are living the actual brutal reality.
Think about it from their perspective. A shopkeeper in Kashmir might face extortion from militant groups one day and arbitrary detention by the army the next, caught between multiple fires.
And the internet shutdowns, constant blackouts.
Justified as security measures, sure. But who really suffers? Businesses collapse, students can't study, your families can't communicate. Communities are isolated. Insurgents probably find workarounds, but ordinary people just trying to live their lives bear the brunt. It's collective punishment, essentially.
It's that huge disconnect between high-level strategy and daily life. But history does offer glimpses of something different, doesn't it? Human-centered approaches that actually worked.
You're thinking of the cross-LOC trade, specifically the Srinagar-Muzaffarabad route.
Yeah. Bananas for textiles, basically. Simple commerce across one of the most militarized borders on Earth.
And remarkably, the evidence suggests it worked. It led to a 26% decrease in violence between 2006 and 2008. Just facilitating that human connection, that shared economic interest, actually reduced conflict.
Proof that empowering people, fostering shared interests, can be a powerful counterweight to all the animosity in strategic games.
It really can. Sadly, that trade route was suspended in 2019. The key insight here from this human-centered design layer is that this isn't some abstract game. It's daily fear, economic hardship, and deliberate misinformation from millions. Ignoring their reality, ignoring their potential for positive interaction, just ensures the suffering continues.
A powerful reminder. Beneath all the posturing is just people trying to survive, and they're paying the price.
A sobering truth. And a vital perspective as we move into the action stack. Specifically Layer 6, risk and resilience. How do we stress test this volatile situation? How do we identify ways to break this dangerous stalemate?
Okay, we've looked at the systemic risks, the psychology, the human cost. Layer 6. Risk and resilience. This is where we confront the most dangerous scenarios head on, right? What could actually shatter this fragile stability? And how prepared are we? Or, more likely, unprepared.
Exactly. What are the potential tripwires? First, let's think about the air. Remember that 2019 dogfight? A repeat incident, an accidental air combat kill is not unthinkable. Medium probability? Maybe. But the impact? Potentially catastrophic, immediate mobilization.
And a critical vulnerability.
There's no formal incidents at sea air agreement between India and Pakistan. No agreed protocol for how to de-escalate if something goes wrong in the skies. That's a massive gap.
Terrifying. Second tripwire. A cross-border terror mega event, something on the scale of Mumbai 2008.
Given the continued presence of groups like LET and JEM and the documented security lapses on the Indian side we discussed, the probability is, unfortunately, medium-high. The impact would be immense, unbearable pressure on India to retaliate massively.
And the critical gap there.
No joint investigative mechanism. After an attack, it immediately descends into blame and counter-blame, fueling tension instead of enabling a coordinated response to the actual perpetrators.
Fuels the cycle. Okay, third tripwire. This one's chilling. An end tripwire failure.
Yeah. Imagine a minor radar glitch, some technical malfunction. Now combine that with a deliberately fabricated social media storm, maybe a deepfake video amplified by those information warfare units.
So the glitch itself might be low probability.
But the scenario becomes medium-high risk when you factor in the degraded information environment, the deep mistrust, and those hair-trigger nuclear doctrines, especially Pakistan's full-spectrum deterrence. The potential impact. Existential.
And the mitigation gap. The DGMO hotlines exist,
but they lack real-time verification protocols for disinformation. How do you tell if that incoming missile report is real or a sophisticated fake when you have only minutes to decide whether to launch your own nukes?
The combination of digital fakes and nuclear tripwires is unthinkable.
Deeply worrying. These are critical vulnerabilities. So what does building resilience look like? We have to be realistic. Eliminating risk entirely might be impossible given the deep-seated issues. The focus has to be on creating robust circuit breakers.
Circuit breakers, okay. Like what? Reactivating those old back channels, the ones that worked to some extent around 2005.
Yes. Quiet, unofficial diplomacy. Reestablishing those lines of communication is vital. And crucially, establishing neutral verification teams.
Like OPCW-style observers.
Exactly. Give them independent access. Let them investigate alleged terror sites and claims of civilian casualties from military strikes. Inject objective facts into the narrative. Make it harder for either side to make unsubstantiated claims.
Independent, verified facts. A neutral referee for when things go bang.
Precisely. We also need to upgrade the comms channels, the DGMO hotline. Make it a secure video link. Mandate a 30-minute response time for critical alerts. Seeing the person, hearing them, adds a layer against misinterpretation.
And leveraging external pressure, using financial instruments.
Absolutely. Tie IMF or AIIB loan tranches to verifiable actions, like jointly publishing monthly data on infiltration attempts and arrests. Financial incentives often speak louder than appeals to morality.
Hitting that budgetary nerve we talked about. And what about the human dimension?
We have to bring that back. Reopen the cross-LOC trade routes. So Nagar Muzaffarabad, bananas for textiles. The data showed a 26% reduction in violence when that trade was active.
26%? That's significant.
Put it under Red Cross monitoring for transparency. Every truck crossing that line is a small investment in shared interests, a counter-narrative to conflict. Empower the people who benefit from peace.
And finally, tackling the digital battlefield.
Head on. A mutual no deepfake pledge during elections. Enforced by an independent Indo-Pak EU fact-checking consortium with actual teeth, direct links to platforms for rapid takedowns of synthetic media. Starve the outrage machine.
These are practical measures, focused.
They are. They acknowledge the risks and try to build resilience through transparency, better communication, shared interests, and verifiable truth. Moving from just identifying threats to actively patching the vulnerabilities.
So engineering safeguards instead of just hoping a crisis doesn't happen.
Exactly. Which brings us to the final layer. Execution engine. How do we actually translate these ideas into implementable actions?
Okay. We've assessed the risks, the psychology, the human costs, the vulnerabilities. We've outlined circuit breakers. Now layer 7, execution engine. This is where the rubber meets the road, right? What concrete, pragmatic steps can actually be taken now? What illusions do we have to shed?
Shedding the illusion that some grand peace deal is just around the corner. This is about the hard, maybe unglamorous work of engineering practical fixes to prevent disaster, working within the current reality of deep mistrust. It's not about building trust first. It's about building verifiable systems first.
Systems designed for transparency, taking ambiguity out of the equation.
Exactly. So pragmatic, step 1, straight from resilience, dual key transparency, establishing no proxy zones.
Okay, how?
Demarcate 5-kilometer strips on both sides of the LOC and the border in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Verified by satellite, weekly, by a neutral third-party tech firm reporting to an agreed international body.
And the dual key.
Any confirmed violation, clear evidence of training camps, major militant movement automatically triggers a briefing to the UN Security Council. No arguments, just automatic exposure. It removes plausible deniability.
Undermines the whole denial game, I like.
Yeah.
Step 2.
Hotline 2.0. Upgrade that DGMO hotline. Audio only isn't enough. Shift it to secure video. Mandate a 30-minute response time for high-level escalation alerts. Seeing the other person adds accountability, reduces misinterpretation.
Clearer, faster, more direct communication in a crisis. Step 3.
External leverage trigger. Use those financial levers we talked about. Tie IMS or AIIB loan tranches to a specific, measurable action. The joint verifiable publication of monthly data on infiltration attempts and arrests. Both sides publish.
If they don't.
Failure to release the data within, say, 48 hours of the month's end automatically freezes a pre-agreed loan tranche. Use that budget pressure to force basic transparency.
Hitting the wallet to force accountability. Okay, step 4. Back to the human level.
Reboot the trade corridor. Reopen Srinagar Muzaffarabad. Bananas for textiles. Put it under Red Cross Customs seal for neutrality. Yeah. Remember the 26% reduction in violence last time?
Can't argue with that data.
Every truck is an investment in peace, building shared economic interests, empowering local communities who gain from stability.
Makes sense. Finally, step 5. Tackling the info war.
Deepfake armistice. An info ops firewall. Both governments make a mutual pledge. No use of synthetic media for political manipulation, especially during elections.
Just a pledge.
No, enforced by that independent Indo-Pak EU fact-checking consortium we discussed, with direct APIs to social media platforms for rapid takedown of verified deepfakes. Starve the digital fire before it starts a real one.
So this isn't about idealism, is it?
Not at all. Consider the alternative, the current slide towards potential catastrophe. These are pragmatic, verifiable steps designed to prevent the predictable failures we identified earlier.
Small, focused intervention, engineering de-escalation.
Exactly. Choosing bounded rationality over this endless high-stakes gamble.
So there it is. 7 layers applied to the India-Pakistan dynamic. The cognitive cleanse, it laid bare some ugly truths. Pakistan's proxy gamble backfired massively. India's security vulnerabilities are real and repeatedly exploited. No heroes in the story.
The moral intelligence layer revealed the mutual hypocrisy. Proxy war versus punitive strikes that risk civilian lives. Elites benefiting while ordinary people pay the price.
Systemic foresight painted that chilling picture. Every clash shrinks the margin for error. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine is a huge risk factor. Resources squandered. Digital deepfakes weaponizing information.
Embodied insight exposed those deep psychological and institutional drivers. Decades of conditioning for conflict. Institutions wired for confrontation. Political exploitation of fear. Soldiers on high alert. Societies trapped in narratives.
Human-centered design brought it back to the ground. Kashmir, internet shutdowns, economic hardship, information warfare impacting real lives. but also that glimmer of hope from the cross-LOC trade.
Risk and resilience stressed the urgency of safeguards. It showed the gaps: no air incident protocol, no joint investigation mechanism, the risk of nuclear miscalculation fueled by fakes.
And the execution engine offered concrete alternatives. Verified zones, secure video hotlines, financial triggers for transparency, reviving trade, a firewall against deepfakes. Actionable steps to build in safety nets before it's too late.
Look, neither side has clean hands here, and both are playing with fire. When the addiction to proxy warfare meets nuclear reality, rational strategy often gets lost. And relying on wishful thinking in this situation, well, history shows that's incredibly dangerous.
So the brutally clear takeaway is detox the narratives, dismantle the proxies, hardwire verifiable safeguards. Otherwise, the subcontinental roulette keeps spinning until someone hits the worst kind of jackpot.
This has been The Thinking Stack. And frankly, if you found any of this deep dive reassuring, you probably weren't paying close enough attention.
Hit subscribe. Share this analysis. Maybe, just maybe, push leaders to prioritize these kinds of pragmatic solutions over the seductive but ultimately suicidal path of perpetual conflict.